Well, hello and welcome. And I'm here with Kevin D. Turner to untangle something really curious. Why does one professional claim feel meaningful and trustworthy, while another, using many of the same words, feels like, in Kevin's words, personal branding? Hello and welcome, Kevin.
Yeah, Sigrid, thank you very much for having me here. I'm excited. I love this topic of trust and people and how we develop that. And so I'm very excited to be here. Thank
That's
you.
great. And I'm looking forward to your sharing of your insights. Now, Kevin, you are an executive positioning and outplacement partner, and you are eliminating personal branding. Before we get into the topic, maybe you should give us a little explanation what personal branding means to you for our
And
viewers.
it's what I see every day, Ingrid. It's basically this kind of, maybe it's inadvertent, maybe it's accidental, but it's demarketing of oneself, right? Where you're positioning yourself not to be a perfect solution. You're trying to be everything to everyone. They always have that expression, Jack and Jill of all trades, right?
Mm, mm.
That follows with masters of none. And nobody hires masters of none unless they're running a convent. That's just the way it is, right? So
Absolutely.
getting out of that mode, getting out of that, trying to be very generic in the sense of I want to capture the attention, but I don't want to give away too much, or I don't want to commit to too much because it might limit me. And
That's,
that
yeah.
is personal branding, right?
Absolutely. I love that. I mean, I understand it, but it's not, not everyone might on first approach understand it. So thanks for that explanation. And I think you're absolutely right. There is often, from my experience with smaller size businesses working, that they just want to be everything for everybody so that they get somebody in the end and not missing out. I think that's often a fear behind it. But that is not the main topic that we're going to go into today. Kevin, you wrote this interesting, excellent article that is around professionals, claiming meaningful and trustworthy details about themselves. And some of them actually are able to get responses while others are really not, tapping into what they want and they're not getting the interest for it. So when somebody makes a claim professionally, what is the difference between becoming a trustworthy voice and not being a trustworthy voice, in your opinion, from some of the details you wrote about?
Well, absolutely. And I think it really boils down into just that. If I make a claim, if I say I'm a thought leader, I'm a transformational leader, or I transformed an organization, that is purely a claim. I could transform an organization and make it worse, right?
Yeah.
So that claim doesn't have a value that I can say, was that good or bad? I could be a thought leader and I could actually be thoughtless, right? I could be dumb
Love
in
that.
that sense of what I'm being a thought leader about is not what everybody should be doing.
Mm,
So you
mm.
could be a bad thought leader. That's the difference, I think, in that process of just making a claim.
So people are making a lot of claims, of course, on LinkedIn, where your, expertise, your field of expertise is, where you're looking after people, helping them to be recognized and to gain trust, which is what we're both doing, which is, a combined positioning that we have. So what I'm taking from your description here, that it is easy enough to make a claim and someone else makes a claim pretty much similarly. Are we talking specifically on a profile in the about section or in their content or all of the above, Kevin?
I think it flows through all of the above. If you make a claim at the top and you don't back it with proof, you might still get them excited enough to dive in a little deeper, maybe get into the about. But if you're not providing proof at that point, that's where things get lost, right?
Mm,
If
mm.
if I'm a transformational leader, I want to tell you, what I led, what my impact was. Bring it down to dollars if possible, right? And provide it in a sense that I can see, you had a cost savings of 40 million, and that equated to the ability to service more, right? Or to do these kind of things that we couldn't do before. So it's not just the metric itself, but it's the value on top of that. So you can have a claim and it goes so far, right? People might believe you, they might not. You throw a proof metric in there, and now I'm starting to understand. But then you end up with what that value is. How does that impact things? That's where you have a component that a human can put value into. And when we see things, we don't see them like the machine does, like AI. AI sees claim, proof, it must be true, because AI doesn't know what's true or not true. It is very simple. It does very simple math, right?
Yeah,
It's an
yeah,
algorithm.
yeah.
Humans want to say, okay, you made a claim, you gave me some proof. What did that do? What's the value? Because
Mm.
we have to almost imagine things, right? When we read a claim like that, that's got that proof and everything else, we're actually picturing things in our head, right?
That
We're seeing things happen. We're seeing more loyalty because they did X, Y, and Z. That's how we process,
I
and that's
absolutely
very
agree.
different.
Yeah, it reminds me straight away of my marketing background and thinking of the networking I offer now. So, our words create images in the mind of the other person that hears our words. So, that's one thing. And you've used, I'm just going to cite out of that article from you here. You've cited that example. For example, if there's a statement like led enterprise transformation, which you already touched on before, I mean, what does that really mean? Not much, it's three words and it doesn't really translate into much detail. Then, when you add a bit more context, led enterprise sales transformation across a 6,000 plus seller
Mhm.
organization, we already have that context with it, like you just shared. Now, the question that pops up now for me is this more needed for larger size work or proof that you want to do, or does this go for anybody at any type in their journey, in their business?
There's always the expression, we do business with people, not companies,
Mm,
right? The size of the company has very little to do with it. It's the individual. So whether you're an entrepreneur running a one person shop or you're a Fortune 50 company, the same equation comes into play. And most people don't understand that. And the other component of that is, if I work for, and I worked for Sony Corporation. If I added 200 million into revenue one year, at the scale of Sony, that's almost nothing. If
mm,
I did that to a small mom and pop business, that relevance is completely different, right?
mm, mm,
So people
mm.
get tied up into, maybe the metric is too big or too small. And what they really should be thinking about is, people put it in perspective, right? Within kind of a relevant scale. The fact that it exists, the fact that you're offering it up, means it must be true, which anytime we feel somebody is being true to us, we trust them a little more, right? And that's, I think, part of that cycle.
That's hugely important. So two other questions have just popped up for me then. One is, does it have to be metrics necessarily when we're talking about relevance? Smaller business, it might be relevant in a different way to having a smaller or a larger number if we're talking numbers. But how does that transfer to, does it have to be numbers to be mentioned as proof of something?
In the context of written, numbers always stand out, right?
Mm,
When we're
mm,
looking at a
mm.
paragraph or a sentence, when we see numbers, we will cue into them. And interesting enough, when we see numbers within a paragraph, without even reading the paragraph, we already have a trust level. So numbers are important, but this relevance could be done in other ways, in kind of the scale of what the impact was. So it
Mm.
doesn't necessarily have to be numbers, it doesn't necessarily have to be dollars, but the more simplified we can make that, the more it stands out in the writing often, the more people cue into it. And so it's about kind of building that process.
Yeah, I think the reason I'm asking, Kevin, is that we have a lot of times, or we used to have particularly, people claiming, oh, I've made this many million, hundreds and thousands, and here's my picture of my PayPal account, how all this money came in. And always, that's always felt like, okay, that's supposed to be proof. But for some people like me, it feels like, I don't really trust you at all. I don't think that's true proof. So we have to gauge, as you said earlier, where it is relevant, isn't it? How?
Absolutely. And to me, those kind of claims mean they're probably pretty good at graphics.
Yeah.
Right? So they can adjust graphics really well. I don't ever believe them
Mm,
because some things you
mm.
don't share like that, right? I'm making $1 million this year, and
Yeah,
I can
yeah.
teach you how to do it for 13.99, right? It's like there's a kind of a scam involved. So that's the
Mm.
other beauty of metrics is they can work against you if
And
you haven't
yet,
built trust, right?
yeah, that's right. And yet, in from personal experience, I have followed and engaged working with people who had not the claim in that way, but they certainly claimed, to have made so many hundreds and thousands through this method that they've used. And something has drawn me to it to work with such a company or such people, and then finding out that they actually know very little of what I already know, and that claim, sure, maybe they did make the money, maybe they did not. I don't really know, but it's not about the money. You need to trust them. So what made me trust them is what I'm now wondering, Kevin, what does make us trust somebody? Is it proof? Is it the proof in the words? What else do you think plays into that as well?
Well, and I do think it's a combination. You got to have the right keywords, right? The semantics in the process of getting someone to understand, and it is that proof, and potentially talking about the value of that proof. It's the whole equation, right?
Hmm.
But it
Hmm.
also has to be done in the right way. If you're doing it in the sense of very self-promotional as opposed to more advisory, right? So if you say, I just made $1 million and I can teach you how,
Yeah.
starting out with that metric, it's too strong, right? It hits
Yeah.
somebody right smack, in the face, and it's meant to, and you don't trust that. Now, if they started out saying, I've built a system and, I'm here to share it and blah, blah, blah. And
Hmm.
over the years I've made, bring it down a little farther down in, and it becomes more trustable. When it's the
It.
first thing you start with, that becomes the power coming in. And if it's too
Hmm.
much,
Hmm.
if it's too bold, it loses majority of the people.
I think you're absolutely right. So for me, the key would always be to get to know the person. Now, I did that on those occasions where I have had this adverse experience, feeling that it was right. But I think it is really important for all of us to have the personal experience with a person. So, for example, in the
Mhm.
networking that I offer, which is specifically online and it is specifically live streaming the networking, the introductions into LinkedIn at the time when we do it. And I take it from the introductions of the person into a guided discussion where you get to hear, see, and sort of get a feel if you're working on that feel arena with people, you can hear in how they respond to a question or on a topic more about who they are. I think that is a valuable component of
Mhm.
creating trust. How would you bring that into a more static, into written content, coming back to the article that you wrote on this, because that to me spoke more about the written content. How do you bring that into written content aside from being as detailed and clear on, let's call it, facts and figures with, the value component in it? Is there something else that we could do in the written component content to create trust?
I think a lot of it is kind of how we approach. We're talking to individuals, right?
Mm,
Bob Berg had a great book that he wrote, The Go Getter, the Goat Giver. Pardon me. Um, and that was where that know, like, and trust comes from,
yeah,
right? And you hear
yeah.
people talking about it all the time. You do have to build some connectivity with people, right?
Mm,
In that
mm,
process, and they've got to be able to see you as potentially who they are, right? And go, I could hang out with Singrick. I could do that, right?
mm.
I have that connectivity, and that's where kind of trust follows. If we are too salesy, if we're too flashy, that's going to turn off a lot of people.
Yeah.
And I think, we have to be careful of that. But at the same time, people do need things that they can compare. So if they're making a decision, do I go with this coach or do I go with that coach? Do I go with this product, this software or that software? It does get down into those metrics, those
Mm,
numbers, right? So then they can make some comparisons. They still have to like what they're looking at first,
yeah, yeah.
but then the numbers are where those decisions might be made.
The like factor is a very strong one, isn't it? So if we
Mhm.
are coming onto a, let's come back to the networking. We're coming onto the networking. The live opens up, the live stream opens up into LinkedIn, and straight away you're looking at all the people that are there in the Zoom room, which brings the live into LinkedIn, and you have a look. Is the person smiling? Are they looking into the camera, or are they looking down here? Are they having a quick drink of coffee? What does the background look like? I think they're all signals as humans that we take on board straight away, isn't it? So when we go to a profile, where you work a lot with individuals and companies, of course, then we take a look at the banner, and what are the
Mhm.
colors, what's on there, what's the text. We have a look at the headline below that, and then perhaps we go into the about section. Now, I'm always curious about the about. Not everybody reads a full about, but I think that's an important component, and you are mentioning that certainly in the article. And I
Mhm.
took some of it away when I when I read it to revise some of my about section, for example. I think there is a lot to it, and people in general, especially in this age of AI that we are in, we are needing to attract people because we're working with people. We're not working with
Mhm.
AI, but we've got to have the AI on our side, because
Mhm.
that is the tool that makes us visible, isn't it, Kevin?
Oh, absolutely. And you are kind of playing to two fields in that sense.
Mm,
You do want to be able to be understood by the machine process, and then you want to be valued by the humans. The machine can get you the audience to the humans, but they still have to be able to understand what your value is once you're there. And so people sometimes are really good at either one. Rarely
mm,
are they good at both, right? And to me, it's not as difficult as it may seem in how you kind of prepare that. And it's really kind of understanding how those things are different,
mm,
and yet what that similar line is, right? What connects them. And the one thing about people is we have a lot of subliminal things that come into play when we're making decisions. Something as simple as a profile image, right? Our photo. And I was talking about to somebody today, they had the standard photography gray background. Well,
right, right.
they're a little older. When you see gray, you think really old, right? You think this person doesn't have energy, or they're having a gray day, it's cloudy, whatever it is.
Yeah.
That background image, you take that same background, you clean it up, you make it pure white, or you make it bright yellow or orange. Now all of a sudden, the human sees that and says, that person's got energy. They're
Yeah.
creative. I love that, right? They have a different perception. The machine wouldn't see a difference in it at all,
No, no. And
right?
that
So,
is absolutely the difference. Like we said a little bit earlier, the words really matter because we put meaning to words. Now we have,
mhm,
different people, different cultures, different backgrounds. So the meaning of the words, you need to choose your words so that it is going to be a positive meaning in all cultures, not that you end up,
mhm.
somewhere in, I don't know, Asia, they have a really negative understanding of a certain word. So make sure that those terminology you're using is correct, but it needs to fit in with your, the way you want to put the proof out there. I think you have really highlighted a number of very important components here around the whole idea of why does one professional claim feel meaningful and trustworthy while another using much the same words may not. I would like us to come to the conclusion for this discussion, which is really interesting, Kevin. And I'm going to put the link to that particular article I keep referring back to below the video for people to be able to go and read it for themselves and put a comment there for you. But I'd like us to come to a conclusion, please, around what we need to do to make our claim meaningful and trustworthy. I know you've already talked about it. Give us a summary sentence on that, please.
I think the first thing is make sure you're a human, right? Be who you
Mm.
are. Don't try to pretend you're more than that, and focus in on what you deliver and give it enough proof that people believe it, right? That they have an ability to see the value in it and be able to compare it on others, because if they're making that decision, who do I pick as a friend, or who do I pick as a business partner, or who do I pick as a servicer? They can make those decisions based on that. And too often you see that make a claim, make it three or four more times, and people will believe it. Making the same claim multiple times doesn't work. All right. You got to have this extra piece of the process. And yes, it's a little bit more work.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, I agree with you there. And the proof, of course, as we have already shared in the discussion so far, the proof needs to be within the context of, what you are wanting to prove. It's got to make sense to it. Just numbers on their own or over the top numbers don't necessarily create the proof that you have achieved, I don't know, $1 million contract or whatever you brought on board. It's got to be within the context of what you really want to be uh, trusted for. I would add then to what we need to do to make a claim meaningful and trustworthy when I'm looking at the networking, particularly online. Which I have reimagined in a very different way. I have the introduction segment and then I have a discussion segment. So every person who comes to the network and gets the opportunity to be a speaker, more or less, in a way.
Mhm.
But not just that, they can really showcase building trust in themselves and the way they talk about whatever the topic is we have. And the two key elements from my perspective to make a claim meaningful and trustworthy is that firstly in the introduction, shorter is better, clear
Mhm.
and focused on who you are, what you do, who you do it for. And secondly, in the guided discussion, be mindful of how you talk about it, which is what you've just shared with us all along, Kevin. What are the words I'm using? What are the examples or stories I'm telling? Do they make sense in this context? Are they believable proof? And will I follow up with all the people that I have met there? Now, let me make sure I put the link to that article because it's very interesting and the topic itself very interesting. Thank you, Kevin, for speaking with me on this particular topic today.
Thank you, Sigrid. I really appreciate the opportunity too.